Breaking news! The 2025 draft is fast approaching, and head coach Sean Payton is keeping his radar on to take advantage of the best opportunities with GM George Payton. The Denver Broncos' 2025 NFL draft strategy could take a surprising turn at pick number 20, and fans need to prepare for what could be a game-changing selection. I'll tell you everything we know so far, but before I go any further, make sure you've hit the like button if you believe the Denver Broncos will be able to become much stronger than they were in 2024. In 2025, we'll go further in the playoffs, and maybe even compete in the Super Bowl. Man, I really believe. If possible, comment like this: Go Broncos, I believe. The overwhelming consensus from the Senior Bowl and experts like ESPN's Matt Miller is that this draft class is loaded with defensive line talent, perhaps the best in 15 years. That reality could play a big part in Sean Payton and George Payton's decision-making process. The name of the game here isn't just filling holes, it's capitalizing on a historically deep draft class in the trenches. For those expecting the Broncos to target a running back or tight end early, hit the brakes. While those positions are needed, the Broncos may be looking at a longer-term strategy, building a dominant defensive front. The departure of nose tackle DJ Jones leaves a void in the middle of the defensive line, and with so much talent available in this year's draft, Denver may opt to replace him with a younger, cheaper alternative rather than re-sign an aging veteran. That means defensive tackle could very well be the play at number 20. The question is, which defensive lineman will they target? According to Mel Kiper's rankings, some of the top defensive tackle prospects include Mason Graham, Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon, and Ohio State's Ty Williams. If Denver is looking for a plug-and-play starter, these names should be at the top of its board. Mason Graham is widely considered a top 10 pick, meaning Denver will likely have to look elsewhere. But Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant, they're right in the sweet spot for the Broncos' first-round selection. Let's break these guys down. Walter Nolan, coming out of Ole Miss, is an intriguing option. At 6 feet 3 inches, 293 pounds, he's got the size to hold his own in the trenches. But what makes him special is his ability to get after the quarterback. Not every 300-pound defensive tackle can rack up 6.5 sacks in a season, but Nolan did exactly that last year. He's not just a space eater, he's a legitimate pass-rushing threat from the interior, something that is increasingly valuable in today's NFL. Now let's talk about the outlier, Deone Walker from Kentucky. This guy is a physical anomaly, 6 feet 7 inches, 340 pounds. Just take a second to let that sink in. You do not see guys that size who can move well very often, but Walker has shown flashes of surprising mobility. The big question mark on him? Inconsistency. He had 6 sacks in 2023, but only 1.5 in 2024. Where did that production go? That's the question NFL teams, including the Broncos, will need to answer before spending a high pick on him. Another name in the mix is Kenneth Grant, who stands at 6 feet 3 inches and 342 pounds. He's an absolute wrecking ball against the run, taking on double teams and freeing up linebackers to make plays. But if there's a knock on Grant, it's that he disappears at times. Some games, he's a dominant force. Other games, you barely notice him on the field. If Denver takes him at number 20, they'll need to be sure he can bring it consistently every week.
If defensive tackle isn't the play, the Broncos could look at edge rusher. A sleeper name to watch? Shamar Stewart. He's got the size, 6 feet 6 inches, 285 pounds, and the athletic traits to make scouts drool. But production? That's another story. He's only managed 1.5 sacks in each of the last 3 seasons. That's a major red flag. Some coaches believe they can take a freak athlete and mold him into a dominant pass rusher. But the reality is, if you're not producing in college, it's hard to suddenly turn into a star at the next level. So, what should the Broncos do? If running back Ashton Jeanty or tight end Tyler Warren are available, they could be tempting picks. But if they're off the board, Denver may have no choice but to pivot to the defensive line, where the talent is simply too good to ignore. Now, it's your turn, Broncos country. What would you do? Should Denver shore up the trenches and grab one of these defensive monsters, or should they go in a different direction? Let me know in the comments. There's no denying that the Denver Broncos have several holes to fill heading into the 2025 NFL Draft. But when you take a step back and look at how this class is shaping up, It's becoming increasingly clear that the strength lies in the defensive line. That's why the front office, led by Sean Payton and George Payton, could be leaning heavily towards selecting a defensive tackle at number 20. If that happens, it would signal a clear commitment to bolstering the trenches, something that could pay off in a big way as the team looks to rebuild its defensive identity. But let's not forget, this decision isn't happening in a vacuum. The Broncos' draft strategy has to align with their broader offseason plans. With free agency looming, Denver will have the opportunity to address certain needs before the draft, potentially changing the calculus of their first-round selection. If they find a way to acquire a veteran defensive tackle on a reasonable deal, that could open the door for a different position at number 20, like a playmaker on offense. However, if the Broncos enter the draft still needing a difference maker on the interior defensive line, then the writing is on the wall. Defensive tackle will be a priority. So, let's take a closer look at the big picture. What are the alternative options if the Broncos decide to go in a different direction? One position that can't be ignored is running back. The Broncos struggled to establish a consistent rushing attack last season, and while Javonte Williams remains a key piece of the backfield, adding a dynamic, explosive runner could take this offense to another level. That's why a player like Ashton Jeanty from Boise State has been heavily linked to Denver. He's a versatile back with the ability to contribute both as a runner and a receiver, which makes him an ideal fit for Sean Payton's system. But there's one problem: there's no guarantee he'll be available when the Broncos are on the clock. If a team like the Miami Dolphins or Dallas Cowboys snatches him up earlier, Denver will have to go to Plan B. And speaking of Plan B, let's talk about tight end. It's no secret that Payton loves having a versatile, playmaking tight end in his offense. We've seen him utilize players like Jimmy Graham and Taysom Hill in unique ways in the past, and there's a belief that he could be looking for his next joker weapon, someone who can line up all over the field and create mismatches. If that's the case, Tyler Warren out of Penn State or Mason Taylor from LSU could be intriguing options. Warren, in particular, has the size, 6 feet 6 inches, and athleticism that NFL teams covet, and if Payton believes he can be a major contributor in both the passing and running game, he might be too good to pass up. But here's where things get really interesting. What if Denver decides to wait on those positions and double down on defense? We've already talked about defensive tackle, but what about edge rusher? Pass rushers are always in high demand, and if the Broncos want to add another weapon opposite Zach Allen, they could look at someone like Shamar Stewart. Yes, the production hasn't been there, but the physical tools are undeniable. The question is whether Denver is willing to take a gamble on potential rather than proven production. This brings us to the ultimate dilemma. Do the Broncos draft for need, or do they take the best player available? If they go with need, running back or tight end makes sense. If they go with the best player available, it's hard to ignore the talent in this defensive line class. And let's be honest, Sean Payton has never been afraid to make bold moves. We saw that last year when he shook things up in free agency and the draft, and we could see it again in April. So, Broncos country, what do you think? Should Denver prioritize the trenches and lock in a dominant defensive tackle? Or should they swing for the fences and go after a playmaker on offense? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to see what you guys have to say. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Broncos coverage as we get closer to draft day. One factor that could sway Denver's decision even further is how Sean Payton wants to build this team for the long haul. The Broncos are still searching for an identity, especially on defense. Last season, we saw flashes of dominance, but inconsistency plagued the unit. A dominant defensive tackle could be the missing piece that stabilizes the front seven and makes life easier for the linebackers and edge rushers. Imagine a player like Walter Nolan or Kenneth Grant eating up double teams, freeing up Denver's pass rush to be even more effective. That's the kind of impact pick number 20 could bring. But let's not forget, Payton is an offensive coach at heart. He knows that the Broncos need more firepower if they want to keep up in the AFC. That's why players like Ashton Jeanty and Tyler Warren remain very real possibilities. The draft board will ultimately dictate Denver's move, but one thing is clear: the Broncos can't afford to miss on this pick. So, what's your gut feeling? Defense or offense? Let's hear it.